My name is Jorgen Bjorndalen. I hope you all enjoyed yesterday as much as I did. Yesterday we heard Marc-André explain how surprises are to be expected for conference organizers. I'm not aware of any surprises today. However, 20 years ago I worked with an electricity trading company. We learned a hard way that behind every blue sky, a dark cloud threatens. So I'll start this small introduction with a picture from the Energy Transition Outlook, which we prepare annually at DNVGL, using our insights in cost development and technical features of all energy technologies. We prepare a forecast for the global energy use towards 2050. Right now, we are preparing the 2019 edition, so we have to stick with the 2018 analysis. This might be looking a bit depressing. With current technologies, we are not going to make it. This 810 figure relates to the 2-degree target. My interpretation is, however, that markets and policies actually work. Emissions are going down. Falling costs have a tremendous impact on the development. So already we see that our projections from the last year for battery costs and uptake of electric vehicles were too pessimistic. And with reference to Mark's keynote yesterday, maybe we should focus more on second-best policies and make sure entrepreneurs are motivated to pursue all possible options. The transition outlook also tells me that because electricity is a key component of any decarbonization strategy, the electricity industry is facing major tasks and changes, both on the supply and on the demand side. As I understand this industry, there are at least two important driving forces having a strong impact, and my guess is that this will continue for a couple of decades. So the first one is that the perception of the climate issue and the impact of global warming is growing, and it's a truly global concern. So the call for effective policies is recognized everywhere, if not by everyone. And the high speed of innovation and cost reductions with electronics and communication has already changed our lives. Those of us with gray hair, most of us had parents when we were teenagers. They told us that telephones, they were for short and urgent messages only. And today, phones are hardly used for talking. But they continue opening new opportunities also within the field of energy. So the cost of a gadget to optimize, for instance, the use of a heating or ventilation system is close to nothing. The charger for my electric vehicle at home in Norway, that it's online and it's probably smarter than me. Together, these two ensures that clever solutions for decarbonization are facing a large market. So the potential reward for successful innovation is high. The market is truly global, and ideas that previously were science fictions are now being implemented, and new business models are indeed emerging. So I shall end this small introduction with a picture from one of our customers. That is a Norwegian utility, the Nordic Power Exchange and Microsoft. They joined forces 2 years ago to develop a generic platform for automated trading of flexibility. So between consumers, producers, prosumers, on the one side, and potential buyers of such flexibility, being it the operator of the local network, the transmission system operator, a trader, or anyone active on other organized markets. So interestingly, this is a flexible platform for trading flexibility. So in this session, we will hear different perspectives on this development. So first, Hugues Giradin from Boralex will explain how their business focus on helping industrial end users taking charge of their own energy solutions. So next, Marc-André from OSSIACO will explain his take on how residential customers take part in mitigating climate change. And finally, Auer from the Vienne University of Technology will present the larger picture with the link between the distributed efforts and the global concerns. So please welcome Hugues Giradin. That's the wrong one. There you are.
Over the last couple of days, I had the privilege of having the detailed presentation of DNV Energy Outlook 2018. Throughout this presentation, I had the feeling of great achievement for renewable energy because I felt at the beginning of the presentation, at least, like we were doing something really significant in this business. But unfortunately, at some point, he got to the slide that he just showed a couple of minutes ago, and I really felt like we're not doing enough. We need to accelerate, and we need to do more. It looks obvious that we're not going to be reaching the 2 degrees Celsius target that we have fixed ourselves. At Boralex, for the last 30 years, we're developing renewable energy. That's the only thing we're doing. In fact, we're doing it by providing long-term energy contract to utilities. We're doing it in 4 sectors, namely biomass, hydro, wind, and solar. The funniest thing is we're only having also 4 customers that I can name here: Hydro-Québec, BC Hydro, EDF, and ISO. Why do we have 4 customers? Well, essentially because right now, and over the time, we needed to have some subsidies in order to develop renewable energy. We needed subsidies because renewable energy was too costly to afford being competitive in the market. The good news is, today, we are competitive. Our bulk energy produced by any of these forms right now could compete with any new form of energy, including hydro and whatsoever. I'd like to take a look at a detailed slide of what we did over the last 10 years. That's the evolution of levelized cost of electricity that you can see in the market since 2009. Look carefully at the road we made. We start from wind being able to produce at $120 per megawatt in 2009 to now being able to offer an average $50 a megawatt. Solar is even more impressive. We started only 10 years ago at $350 a megawatt, and we're now also around $50. And once I'm talking about $50, that's an average. We saw recently in Canada, in Alberta, mainly, request for proposal being allowed at $35 Canadian a megawatt, which is in US dollars something like $30. Pretty cheap energy that we're currently being produced. With that level of price, it seems obvious that we can now tackle a different type of customer. To our reach are the famous RE100 that are currently, let's call them, early adopter. These guys are ready to buy our product right now because they are using the green certificate in order to promote their product. We think it's only the beginning, and we think we need to go beyond the early adopter. We need to convince the rest of the customer to adopt our product. And the only way we'll be able to convince them is to show them our price. We really believe that cheap renewable energy is the way to go. We're already cheap. The problem is we're living in an environment where people think with the old thinking of our old $120 of the past. This change occurs slowly, and it's not known by the small company around the planet, what I would call the not-so-small guy. So our job at Boralex will be to convince them, will be to support them, and to provide them some package. It's pretty easy for people at Apple Corporation or Google Corporation to have a department that would trade their electricity and have to find know-how on how to acquire that type of stuff. As far as we're concerned, we want to target the guys that doesn't have the mean of getting that type of resource for them and provide them with an offer that makes sense and reduce their price of energy. We also believe that looking forward, our tarification is going to face a revolution. Some of you guys, and Jorgen mentioned it a couple of minutes ago, remember the communication business. Some of you, which are old enough, remember a period of time where the majority of the bill that you were paying for communication was long-distance charge. I do remember that. I'm old enough for that. My parent, my mother, my father were slowing me down on using any car that would be more than 15 kilometers away, because that was getting a huge impact on the bill. We think that the long distance of communication of the past is about to become the energy of the future. If you look at the actual structure of your billing, you would see that most of the utility would show you that the vast majority of your bill is clearly energy. And then depending on where you are on the planet, some other fee like interconnection, distribution, transportation might apply, but the bulk of your bill is clearly oriented toward energy. Once you look at the truth, once you look at the real way, the real cost of that, you'll realize that at the end of the day, a vast majority of these costs are split in transportation, distribution, giving you security, and there's probably 1/3 of it, which is really the energy. Now, thinking that we're going and continuing reducing price of electricity, we can foresee that this situation is even going to get worse. The proportion of your bill that is linked with energy is probably going to be reducing for the future. Now, with prosumer getting prepared to supply electricity from home, it's become obvious that the bill structure will have to change. So at Boralex, we'd like to enter into this new market. We don't want to sell long distance only. Of course, we want to keep going, supplying long distance, but we want to produce some other form of energy than bulk energy. We want to enter in the flexibility and dispatchable market. How do we do that? Well, we'll have to store at some point. And right now, I don't know if you noticed on one of the slides that I showed a bit earlier, there was a pink trace on it that showed a very steep decline of price. I didn't mention it, but this one is the decline of price of battery. Thanks to Elon Musk and the EV industry that has substantially shown that battery system could become affordable. We're not in energy the main driver of this reduction. It's clearly the EV industry which does so. But it looks obvious that using a mixture of renewable energy and battery system is going to help us provide affordable, flexible, and dispatchable energy in the future. How much in the future? According to Bloomberg, it's not that far away. If you look at the tendency right now, without any subsidies, it looks like we'll be able to beat any open cycle gas turbine within an horizon of 5 years. Now, do we have to wait 5 years? I'm not sure. I guess at some point, if the right policy are being put in place, and we see some place around the planet that are doing so, we should be in a position to tackle this market right now. And this is one of the things we want to do at Boralex in the future. An example of the good that that type of thing could do, just in New York State, for example, there's 3,000 megawatt of gas turbines which are dispatched 5% of the year. These turbines are dispatched once it's very, very cold outside. You can imagine that the cold weather also trigger high gas price. So you get a fleet of 3,000 megawatt, 50-year-old machine dispatched in high gas price. So what does these guys do? They, of course, switch to kerosene or any form of liquid, which make them pollute a lot. Our job in the future is to make sure that we provide a renewable offer in order to stop these machines to be put in service and produce greenhouse gas. It's not going to be easy, but we think that the way to accelerate the change in climate change is by tackling new customers, convincing them to embrace the renewable energy, provide new products that allow our new capacity to produce flexible energy, and convince the government to support us with new laws and policy. And we also need to all work together. We need the prosumer market. We need energy from everywhere. We need flexibility, and we need a lot of expertise that I see here in this room. Thank you very much.
I want to start by saying that over the last year, I go to many conferences to discuss about the future of energy. And all the time, we forgot something. We forgot to really think about the customer. Oh, people talk to me about the customer as a load forecast, load curve, a way to reduce greenhouse gas, prosumers. Never about us. My family, your family, our kids. And probably because, it's explained because when I was younger, that was energy for my family back then. My dad drove a Ford Taurus, was a great car back then. We go to Petro-Canada, Canadian citizen obligations, and traditional utilities, Hydro-Québec was providing us the energy. That's it. That was my world. What choice do I had, or my dad had? Well, Ford Taurus versus Chevy Impala, that's okay, I got this part, but Hydro-Québec versus what exactly? Petro-Canada versus Exxon? Probably the same thing. Because for centuries, we cannot, as individuals, generate our own energy. But this thing changed very rapidly. A single solar panel is anecdotal. But when you consider that the single solar panel is the first time for a century that individual can generate their own energy without having to refer or buy from a large corporation, now you got the sense of the disruption. Sorry for that, Hugues, by the way, but you still have a super great company. Still going to be continue to be an happy shareholders. So the world changed very rapidly, and this is the world of today. So from my point of view now, as a consumer, it's completely changed. Well, solar panels, are the technology there yet? Not completely, but it's a real competition to traditional utilities. Now we have ESCO, Direct Energy in the US, for examples, that provide you all the services under one roof. So gas station, now we have competition from EV street charging, supercharger. Home charging was start to emerge. Google with Nest. Google is selling me megawatt. Google telling me that, hey, use my Nest technology, you're going to use less energy. Less energy for my same comfort is just like buying energy. And EV, for the first time, also link mobility to energy. And that's also another problem. Everybody thinks in silos. I heard lots of people going to conference about utilities and say, we're going to have a flex market for electricity. Got it. I go to a company for oil and gas and say, well, we're going to provide a different kind of way with hydrogen, and they want to get in. I go to a technology company and say, oh, we're going to provide, different way to manage and orchestrate energy. Everybody start to compete for the same single customers. And when we're looking where we're heading, it's going to be even worse. Customers start to have choice. EVs is starting to take over internal combustion engines. As you know, many countries start to ban, and we need to do that. We absolutely need to do that. The residential solar industry, with arrival of storage, going to completely disrupt the model of traditional utilities. And I totally agree with Hugues. In this regards, there will be security providers and no longer energy providers. EV home charging is going to take over street charging. But what are we implementing right now? Home charging. So in regard of policies of investment, it's something also we have to consider. Should we make investment looking at the past, or should we consider the world we're getting into, knowing that the world profoundly changed with the arrival of the fact that people can generate their own energy, entailing their mobility and their energy by themselves? So I really love this quote from Marie-Josée Nadeau, back then was chair of the World Energy Council at Istanbul in 2016. She was talking about the grand energy transition and say, inevitably, there will be new winners and losers. It's even more fun when you know that Vladimir Putin was in the room and she basically says, oil and gas company, be careful about what's going on. From a geopolitical point of view, reducing the impact of oil and gas will have consequence. That's why the winner of the past are probably not the winners of tomorrow. So let's have an overview of where we stand also today. Let's look at utilities to start with. Yes. Utilities are still using central planning system. You are the customer. We all customer, okay? Everybody here is in this room. This is what is important. I got in a conference about 3 months ago, and somebody was absolutely pleased to say that they were using their new smart meter technology to cut down power to 50,000 families in order to save downtown grid in the middle of a storm. And when I got to the podium, I say, how dare you to put 50,000 people in distress in the middle of a storm to save what? A grid? Stability? Isn't the people should be important and not a grid? Central planning is not the way of the future when people have choice. So 2 of my favorite quotes, somebody asked me to have a top 10 quotes about what I heard, but this one is a very good one. Obviously, I will not name neither the person or the utilities, but this is almost the literal quotes I got. And I'm going to, at the end, just tell you a bit what OSSIACO is doing, but you understand we're on the distributed energy side. And after we introduce our technology, the person in charge, with a lawyer in the room, basically start bang on the tables, threat us, and leave the room with this quote. This is communism. They know what is good for us. Well, I must say no. I think people know what is good for them. Yes, as a community, we need to make social choice, and this is usually what people do. The second one is also a funny one, just as an illustration. So we're talking about the impact of EVs on the grid, and the vice president say, what? You're thinking that people can charge their cars when they want? No. We'll never allow that. That's a problem, okay? They need to take our excess of electricity in the middle of the night. This is, what about I have to go to theater tonight? It's just, that's not the point. I really love this one, too. I cannot name neither the utilities or the person here, but you can be very surprised who they were. So you're going to say, well, regulator is going to come at play here and going to save the day, right? This is what's going to happen. Politicians, regulators, this is usually the way it's worked in this world. So about 6 months ago, they asked me to intervene and give my opinion. Yes, sometimes people, this is still scary to invite me though, to give my opinion on such thing like regulations in the Washington state. And so here's my takeaway of the reports. So the first thing they say, we want more electrical vehicles, but guys, we want less electricity. More EVs, less electricity. That's a great takeaway, isn't it, Jorgen? So I say, well, first, there's a conflict here. But they say about, a page later, this 200-page report, the Commission previously addressed this dichotomy. But we're going to use demand response, we're going to use flex pricing, so basically, as long as you charge in the middle of the night, we're okay with what we said previously, right? So, okay, we're out of jail on this one. So let's look about what's happened a page later. Prior attempts to implement such dynamic pricing has limited success due, and honestly, they basically say it doesn't work. People charge their car when they need it. And I think this is the concept of freedom, but this is interesting. But they still need to enforce something. So they finish by saying, we have another problems. We are a free country. So even though you guys are a mobility and a monopoly, we cannot enforce any ruling in regard of when people can charge their car. So basically making all this ruling useless because they know they will never be able to enforce it. What should we think out of it? This is a regulation from 6 months ago pushed by the very large utilities. And by the way, we still don't have the answer how it's going to turn out. This is the reports. So for utilities, for regulators, we are in the unknown. We're going to say we want more renewables. Everybody talk about urban sprawl. What about energy sprawl. What about using great land, forest, agricultural land to put solar farms? What's the point of this? It is what we want as consumer. Hey, my roof is useless, honestly. Well, you can go to Google Maps and see my roof is pretty useless. Why do we have to bid such as distribution and transmission? Why not using it? Are we not creating another problems at the same time we're trying to save? So we go renewables, and mostly because it is an infrastructure market. It's easier to finance a big solar farms than really trying to tackle these problems. And this is a problem that's going to come way sooner than anticipated. So again, what should be our policy, our investment policy in that regard? Looking at the past, like we build big hydro reservoir, and then having the same model for solar farms, or really address what should go. From a consumer point of view, let me give you a bit of takeaway. Probably some of you already know that, but California came out with net zero regulation, meaning that every single new house that's going to be built starting next year will have to generate as much energy as the house used in the course of a year, and that will have to be ready for EV charging. That's mean basically the residential consumption in California are going to flat out starting next year for large generators. This is what it means. Japan, France, Germany all want to engage in this by 2025, meaning flat load for large generators. JP Morgan had just announced that 1 car out of 2 in China will be EV. And honestly, if you have been in China recently, they need that to clean their hair. All the charging is happening at home. Most of those street charging are useless. Still, we're pumping millions and millions of dollars in those infrastructures. The last part is arrival of batteries. The biggest batteries you can have is in your car, and this is basically useless. What if we can link the battery in the car with your solar system in your home and make it at one? And finally, EVs is only at the beginning. Early adopters change their way, their behaviors to accommodate bad technologies. That was mostly what EVs was 5 years ago. Cars is mobility, it's freedom, it's liberty. Now, this is what people said. And I talk to car manufacturers, they all know it's true. As soon as we can charge the car as fast as a regular car, it's done. The world gonna switch EV. So let's have a takeaway from all of this. I think energy is no longer a natural resource market. The time where to be rich in energy, like Beverly Hillbillies, buying a land, finding oil, I'm rich, it's a bit over. And this is as the cycles of 30 years. It's, if you want to bet on that market, it's take 30 years to really exploit it. I think it's no longer an infrastructure market neither. It starts to fade away. Those large wind farms, large solar farms, having those capitals, taking 5 to 10 years, lots of subsidies, starting also to fade away. I think definitely it's no longer a utility market. I think they really already lost the war, they just don't know yet. I think it's now a technology market, and this is the part that is very encouraging, but should be very scary for most of people here in this room, because technology changes every 2 to 3 years. A new patent can change everything overnight, and disrupting one of the largest, if not the largest, and the most critical market in the world. So in a split second, what are we doing at OSSIACO? After 6 years of research, 200 patents, 2 international awards, we're just launching the fastest residential EV charger in the world that used to be bidirectional and extract energy out of the car. People that know Tesla, that's basically a Tesla supercharger from home, without having to change anything inside the home. And this is already spoken for, 1,000 and 1,000. We got taken by surprise. That give us a sheer size. At first, we were thinking that the world was not ready for that. When we got submerged by people asking for this technology, we understand that the market were way more ready than we anticipated. Thank you very much.
So good morning, ladies and gentlemen. In my talk, I'll raise the resource adequacy question. I'll compare a little bit the US and the European electricity market design and try to sort out if we are prepared to host high shares of renewable wind and solar PV generation, and if at present, so our answers to maintain the resource adequacy discussion, if we already exploited several potentials or if there is something missing. So, for example, several flexibility options, the potentials on the demand side, on distribution grid level, and so on. So this leads me to the key questions in my talk. So I tried to figure out a little bit the pros and the cons of the two concepts. So on the one hand, the European electricity market set up, and on the other hand, those in the US. Always against the background, are we already prepared to host further increasing shares on wind and solar PV generation on several levels, not only on transmission level, but also increasingly on distribution grid level, and as our previous speaker said, also household level, so using our rooftops, our facades for building integrated PV, for instance, and trying then to develop novel business models that it can work out also on local level on-site. Then one of the crucial issues is if our answers up to now, so to the resource adequacy challenge, so the answer to implement capacity mechanisms, if this was the right answer in recent years, or if this rather is a backslash to integrated resource planning again, or we might up, let's say, in communism, like my previous speaker already has been talking. And finally, of course, I also try to show a few good and best practice examples, how we can exploit flexibility potentials on the demand side and on distribution grid level, and how we actively can integrate the consumers, the prosumer, and which kind of business models are already existing. So mainly driven in recent years, let's say the capacity remuneration mechanism discussion, so I'll talk now in the next 2 to 3 minutes, but because this was the answer partly to low wholesale electricity market prices, partly negative prices we have observed in both areas, in Europe and in the US. And here in this slide, we see on the left the annual average wholesale electricity market prices in both regions, showing the most important marketplaces each. So this is this colorful picture, and what we see in the black dashed line is the natural gas price in both regions. And the conclusion of our analysis is, so it's cited in the last slide in the references, is that in Europe we have some kind of decoupling in 2011-12, on the one hand from the gas market prices and the wholesale prices in Europe. This has not been the case in the US. So this means that in the US still the CCGT power plants have been responsible for setting the market price in almost all cases, and this decoupling took not place. But in Europe we clearly observed a merit order effect, and that the subsidized renewables significantly had an impact on the wholesale market price developments in the very short term, and also of course on an average level on a yearly basis. So, for instance, the negative prices occurred because the baseload technologies have not been ramping down for a couple of hours and so on. So this is only just one example. Here again in the next slide, showing on the left the renewable support instruments in Europe, and on the right in the in the US. So in Europe, we talk about 30% of renewable electricity generation. In the US, about 15%. In Europe, in the past, we had different kind of subsidy schemes. We now increasingly switch in Europe to auction-based system. So we are auctioning, let's say, trying to find out the willingness to be, let's say, supported, mainly based on feed-in premium tariffs. This means that the residual part towards competitiveness is still somehow subsidized. But we are already, let's say, gradually heading towards entire competitiveness in the market, because this needs to be the ultimate goal, finally, that several of the renewables sustain in the market without any kind of support instruments. So there is no doubt about that. The ultimate goal is to phase out from several of these kind of subsidy schemes. In the US, we have mainly the renewable portfolio standards, with or without mandatory or voluntary net metering or renewable portfolio goals. So these kinds of instruments, of course, triggered renewable support development in the last 10 to 20 years. But besides that, we also already have indirect enablers and voluntary schemes, because in some countries, I show then towards the end of this presentation also some PV sharing community concepts are already implemented, successful business models, but also the microgrid approach and several of the remaining approaches like PPAs, corporate renewable deals, community choice aggregation programs of municipalities and so on. All these kind of stuff have been additional enablers. But now, in recent years, we faced some challenges. So we had, to some extent, on the one hand, a profitability problem of utilities, of their power plants on the one hand. On the other hand, we have not seen sufficient investments into new generation capacities. And our answer was, again, in both regions. On the left, we see Europe, on the right, the US, and we still have forgotten the demand side. We took the demand, as in the past, as a constraint, and we said, okay, we have to add sufficient capacities. And our answer was to implement different kind of mechanisms. So in Europe, for instance, rather in the south, so the blue color shows the capacity payments. So in these markets, we do not have a physical capacity problem, but it was mainly a profitability problem. So we had sufficient capacities there, but they have not been able to earn enough money due to these low wholesale prices. So therefore, in these areas, we claimed for capacity payments. On the other hand, the capacity markets, like we have in UK, but also in the US, so this is the red color. So here we have, let's say, not sufficient investments have been triggered in new capacities. So you can, of course, auction or implement auctions to get sufficient additional generation capacities. But the question finally is, will these new capacities earn sufficient money then in the future in the market? And there are further approaches like capacity obligations and also others. So in my opinion, but we still have also, of course, energy-only markets. So the green color in Europe, so these countries, or in the US, in Texas, we still rely on energy-only markets. And I try to sort out why we shall go ahead with energy-only markets only and avoid these additional kind of distortions of capacity mechanisms. So this leads me to my next slide. So here we see a residual load curve in blue over a year. So for a country, so this is Austria, the scaling. The residual load means this is the total load minus renewable generation. So this finally is the piece, so the deficit area we see here over there. This still needs to be supplied somehow, either to shift the surplus of renewable generation in the surplus area to the deficit area by implementing energy storage capacities, by extending the grids and so on. So this is our challenge. But what's most important is having a detailed look to the extremes. So on the one hand, where we have plenty of renewable generation, where we have a surplus, So the main question is in the future, is it really worth, let's say, for the last 20% of capacity we theoretically would need, let's say somehow to take another 2% of renewable energy, or simply shed this renewable generation? So this is a tricky question, because in the past it always was argued, because renewables have been subsidized, we have to collect several of the kilowatt hours and shift it. But in the future, because I already anticipate that we are completely competitive, so maybe it might not be a big strategy just simply to shed a few kilowatt hours. Because otherwise we still have to think about energy storage support and all this kind of stuff, and then we think about new policy instruments intervening into the market. We clearly see this in Europe. On the other hand, so for meeting, let's say, these peaks, so the ultimate question is, if you rely on an energy-only market, we have to think about scarcity pricing, sending out the correct price signals, or in case. So this could be another option, the capacity subscription. This is another kind of capacity mechanisms where we really take into account, let's say, the willingness to pay to be supplied at every point in time from the customer's point of view. And of course, the additional option is the capacity mechanisms, but I'm not in favor of them. So if we try to stick to energy-only markets, the price signal is most important, and the exploitation of several flexibilities in these respects. And this is very important. And of course, during scarcity situations, we also have to think about scarcity rents. This means that those who are able to serve the market with capacities, that they offer higher prices. And then we have the correct price signals, because then customers, based on the price signal, they can shift, let's say, their load. So this is a load block. You can shift, and of course it depends on the customer, on the processes of industrial customers, so what's their flexibility potential. So this, in my opinion, is the superior solution. When talking about any kind of capacity mechanisms or intervention into the market, so I'm not in favor. So here we see again the entire options in terms of capacity mechanisms, and the colorful picture I've shown in Europe and US. It could be something in between a capacity subscription, and this clearly means that the consumers, that they decide what is their willingness to be served during scarcity hours. Then this, let's say, for these few hours per year, this is some kind of priority service provision to those customers having the willingness to pay, and also the generators or storage might get sufficient revenues. But of course, the challenge is that you need to control the loads of each of the consumers, but in the future, as we heard, the technology is no problem anymore. This might not be a problem. But summarizing, so I'm not in favor of this kind of stuff, even not about even not for capacity subscriptions, because this is rather a backslash than looking into the future. Now coming to the potentials and the flexibility options. So in our study, we have done a thorough comparison of short-term electricity market operations in Europe and the US. I just pick out one item each. So when trying to show a good or a best practice example, so in the US market, I'd like to highlight this locational marginal pricing, so based on a nodal pricing system, because their system emphasizes more the physics of the power system itself. And in Europe, we rather decoupled. On the one hand, the physics of our load flows of the electricity systems, and we implemented marketplaces, so power exchanges. So this is the first example I'll show in the next slide, but then I'll also show some, let's say, market design elements in Europe we have. So this balancing responsible parties on decentralized level, that this also is a key or an option for business models on household level, multi-apartment building level and also for energy communities to be innovative. So in the US, when talking about good or best practices, so in my opinion, their approach is superior compared to the European approach with our zonal prices, because here you see in the market area of Midwest and PJM, this is the real-time market, so a snapshot showing this area represents 10,000 nodes, and on several of these nodes you have the correct price signal, really showing several market participants, including the consumers, or in the futures they even more need to be taken into account, that they can respond to these kind of market price signals and develop corresponding business models. So this is an example rather on transmission grid level. But now coming, let's say, to the distribution grid level, to the regional and the local level. So in Europe, with this kind of balancing responsible parties we have in Europe, this is the basis for novel concepts. So for instance, for implementing energy communities at several levels. So on the left-hand side, we see one approach. I also cited then the paper I developed with my colleagues at university, and also Adam Pötterit, our colleague at MIT. This is a PV sharing concept, including battery. And these kind of models are implemented at present in our areas. So there are many different design options, of course, depending who owns, operates the PV plant and the battery storage on the rooftop, and how the consumers, let's say, are aggregated, which kind of tariffs you use, and so on. On the right-hand side, this is an approach on a wider scale, a local energy community. So at present, we develop a simulation software. We'll offer it open source. And this is a community model where the prosumers beyond the meters, they can let's say, maximize their welfare by sharing PV and generation and also battery storage. So my previous speaker, so if your rooftop doesn't fit, you could contribute with a battery system, but participate also with a PV system from another prosumer. And in this model, we also have implemented, so we purely analyze this without any kind of subsidies and with the status quo, because yesterday Christopher already addressed the critical issue that on the one hand, the upper 10-15% in society, they get these subsidized the PV systems, they would not need it. And on the other hand, of course, you trigger additional problems on distribution grid levels, because the distribution system operator needs to maintain the revenue stream, and so if there is less electricity distributed, so this might cause revenue problems, and the others who do not participate here, they have to pay. So we do all this kind of analysis and also implemented different willingnesses to pay also for the prosumers within this community. So depending on the marginal or average CO2 emissions on a quarter of an hour basis, depending on the, let's say, wholesale price signal. So you can do a lot of stuff in this respect. And we also try to identify the profitability gap. So, and if PV cost slightly decrease, and we observe some wholesale markets around 50 euro per megawatt hour, so then you are not free riding on distribution grid level anymore. So then this discussion is not relevant anymore, whether or not you are free riding in terms of distribution grid charges. So on the left, we see already an implemented approach in the UK. This is a typical peer-to-peer trading or matching approach of a company in the UK. This is part of a bigger European project. It's called Best Res, and here we try to further develop already existing business models of renewable energy aggregators in several respects. So here we see different colors. This means that there are different categories. So on the one hand, we have energy community approaches like we see on the left-hand side, but also several kind of aggregation cases on local and regional levels. So either emphasizing renewable generation, or on the other hand, also load aggregation. And this is supposed to be, let's say, the future, taking into account also the demand side, not as a constraint, but equally to the supply side, and trying to exploit several of the flexibility options. And this leads me to the most important recommendations. So in my opinion, or in our opinion, because this is joint work, so we need to get the price formation correct in the short term in several markets, energy and reserve markets. We have to remove several barriers, supply, demand, and energy storage technologies at several levels, not only on transmission level, and always thinking about, let's say, planning. This means that the demand side needs to be taken into account up to or down to household level, and also trying to exploit the different willingnesses to pay. So because in our, let's say, community sharing approach, it also could happen. So if I have a perfect conditions rooftop, but my own willingness to pay is lower than of my neighbor. So my PV generation will be allocated to the neighbor and not myself. So this is what we already try to sort out. And this means we have to implement several of these flexibility potentials, and we shall avoid further distortions like capacity mechanisms, because this is planning. This is integrated resource planning. This is, in my opinion, this is no market. We rather shall remove all technology-specific subsidies rather fast than in the longer term, also for renewables. So this is now a transition period, but in a couple of years, we simply do not need it for wind and PV. They are competitive. They are in the market. And in addition, if we can manage to do adequate pricing of carbon and internalize also several other externalities in a market-compatible manner, so then I do not see any problem that we can sustain in an energy-only market with these price signals. But summing up, so there can be lessons learned in both directions. So from the US and Europe and vice versa, there is no single solution, this is what's the main message. So we also developed some specific recommendations for either of these two regions. And here in the references, I cite the corresponding literature who is interested into details. Thank you for your attention. So this is it for this talk right now.
Or comments from the audience shortly. There are microphones here. Before that, I have at least one or two questions I'd like to raise, which is my privilege. So despite the wonderful or terrible, as you wish, quotes that Marc showed us, it appears to me that the point of gravity for the electricity sector is perhaps slowly, but it's moving from the supply side to the demand side, from production technologies to customer needs, customer preferences and behavior. What is your view on this? Will customers finally be king?
His involvement in the future is going to increase substantially. I think he's getting option. Customer will have some first choice to do, but also have the choice of being an active participant in the market in a lot of ways. So will it end up being a king? I'm not sure, but he's clearly going to be part of the game.
So I totally agree. So just showing an example when talking about this multi-apartment energy community model. So in Vienna, the municipality already actively acts as an energy service provider in this respect, and they are eager to implement these concepts PV and storage, for instance, this can manage up to 60% of local generation. But Vienne Energy, on the one hand, wants to supply the remaining, and on the other hand, of course, also wants to be the energy service provider for this service. So they already actively contribute because they realized the customers will do it anyway, so with or without them.
Obviously, I have to come with a different answer to continue to support the trend. I spent the last 20 years in the energy business, working for utilities around the world as both electrical engineers and jurists. And one thing I learned also as an entrepreneur is the mismatch between who invests, who have the impact, and this is the problem with the current energy business. As a consumer, you impose me restrictions, and I don't have the benefits of it. I'm investing over my own system, but you dictate how much money I can make out of it. And in every single market over time, those kind of models cannot be supported. So I don't know if they're going to be king or queen, to be honest. If I can predict the future, I will not probably be in that chair and doing something more fun and probably be more rich. But what I know is market disruption like this, where you impose me to cut my air conditioning because it's hot outside and you give me a dimes in exchange, never work over time. My former company installed the first demand response system in 2001. And in that utilities was decommissioned 3 times, and we rebuilt this project 3 times. And every single time, never work. So I think this is where we're going to start to have a change in the behavior of the customers. And remember something, customer votes and regulators go with votes. Will you side on the side of Elon Musk these days or the CEO of your favorite utilities? And politician is also aware of that. So my only point, I want a better world for everybody. I just want everybody to be concerned that, yes, I think it's going to be a change. I still don't know if they're going to rules or not.
So we can't expect any significant change the next 2 years, for instance. Is that what you indicate? It goes slowly.
Does this go slowly? For people that look at the curve, electrical vehicle adoption curves, if you have the time, there's some article on this. Look at what they predict 10 years ago about the number of cars that should be in the market right now. And every single years, they miss their forecasts. It's go faster than anticipated. And I think that we are living also in a world where people are ready to go over the rules. Just to give you, to finish on this, one thing I learned recently was really interesting to me. Right now, the fastest growing sector for solar panel, residential solar panel, are not in California, not in New York, not where we're reading all of this on LinkedIn. It was mostly in Missouri, Mississippi, Louisiana. This is all those states where those solar panel manufacturers tell me they're shipping the most panels. And funnily enough, and this is I agree with my colleague, there's absolutely no subsidies, there's no market for that. You know why these people want solar panels? To be off-grid. They don't trust the man in Washington anymore, so they want to be off-grid. And so they're shipping containers of solar panels in those states right now to just be off-grid. And even in some states, it's not even legal. They don't mind that much. And this is the part where we need to be all concerned because we are the expert, we are the people that should make a better world with energy. So I think we should give to people, to all of us, the solutions.
If I can compliment on that, I think we also need to take in consideration the type of industry we are. I mean, this industry hasn't changed at all for the first 80 years of existence, and we're seeing an incredible trend. And even if everything does not change within 2 years, we already see an incredible acceleration of the change in this market, and it looks like it's going to accelerate.
Maybe just adding to this off-grid discussion. So in Europe or in our areas, we have an extremely high security of supply standard and all these kind of community models and this kind of stuff. So the objective is not be, let's say, disconnected from the grid. So that the objective is to sustain in the market, because these community models, PV installation and battery systems, is already modeled and implemented partly in pilots without any kind of subsidies. So the objective is to maximize the welfare within this community participating and to be fully competitive. So also our analysis, they show, so on a typical multi-apartment building, that also in the long term, at least 40% of electricity is purchased still from the grid. So because some people might misunderstand that the ultimate goal of these kind of concepts is finally to be disconnected from the grid. So that's not the objective of these kinds of concepts we implement in our areas.
So maybe we could sum this up as changes are here to stay. Yeah. As for the climate issue, to which extent do you regard the energy customers as drivers or enablers, or are customers obstacles to the climate change?
Well, I think that the customer choice is probably the first. As you mentioned, they vote and they choose. Not everywhere, whereas there's monopoly, of course, they only vote. But in a lot of places around the planet, customers have the choice. And we see more and more opening for net metering, so at some point they'll also have the choice to make their own decision.
Yes, I totally agree. So we need to exploit more, let's say, the different preferences of the customers. So the choice in several terms. So for instance, our Norwegian colleagues, so as a private person, you already can purchase, let's say, the wholesale electricity market price signal and use this as, let's say, as your real-time tariff. So it's not possible in other areas. You have also different risk profiles of customers. And also other, let's say, willingnesses to pay to be, let's say, green or more, greener. So therefore, this is one of our main recommendations to further open up the retail electricity markets, have much more innovative tariff designs. So at present it's still restricted. So we as an end user, we are rather prevented from participating. Let's say what's going on the wholesale markets.
I think for me, it's obvious if we can bring back the concept that it's energy for all of us, and we take human being in consideration. Again, my remark is, as we expert in energy, we sometimes let the customer away. But if I'm asking all of you in this room who are willing to continue with coal and pollute the planet instead of having clean energy for yourself. Let's say if I have 2 or 3 hands, just be careful after you get out. You can have some problem in the lobby. The fact is that it's a matter of education. It's a matter of giving the choice to people. I think the consumer is already there. And I will not use the word consumer. I think we are already there. Now it's a matter of how we're going to do our transitions, but people's already. I'm just going to finish. When people ask me about electrical vehicles against traditional vehicles, I always say the same thing. Says, okay, let's just do something. If you tell me it's clean enough, go to my house. We're going to go into the garage. I'm going to close the door. Go in your car, make it work for 30 minutes, and then I'm going to do the same with my EV, and we're going to see which one is cleaner. And unfortunately, I never had anybody that accept my challenge so far, so I make my point very easily, and I think we are there.
Yeah. So, from the audience, please go ahead.
Thank you for very interesting presentations. I have 2 questions. One is, I think everybody wants to be perhaps a prosumer, but how many people do you think actually want to be totally off-grid? My sense is it's very small, but we hear always about the defection from the grid. So curious about your thoughts on that. And then for the nuts and bolts of doing all of this energy exchange, how important do you think blockchain would be for making that happen?
I think for the first question at least, I feel interpelled. I think my answer will be none. The reality is people I think utilities is just another source of energy. And it has to be in arbitrage with all my other options. If I'm living in a dense area, for example, here's Le Plateau, for people that know Montreal's very dense area, Manhattan, the grid is the best option. Don't try to put solar panels or battery or worse, a gas turbine in your home. It doesn't make sense. I think in rural, perhaps. I think in suburb, I think it's going to be a mix of energy. I think it's just the flexibility, and people want to be green, and they want to have the options, and I think it's the first one. And so the answer is none. And for the second part, I think the mechanism we put as a wholesale market in the US or in part in Europe, it's a market that works relatively well. I think we just need to implement this at the distribution levels and give the options. But something we have to remember, there's no engineers, there's no CFO at home. And people don't want to bother with all of that. That's why demand response is a failure. I think technology needs to be installed at home, so somebody, or let's say something, should take the decision and do the arbitrage for myself. I think if that happens, we're going to make it.
I would go with none plus one. And there'll be a bunch of crazy guys. Well, I wouldn't qualify them crazy, but there's always some very, very early adopter that wants to do it as a challenge, but it's going to remain marginal. I don't expect a lot of people going off-grid. At the end of the day, there's seasonality problem almost everywhere, unless you're living at the equator, where it's pretty easy to plan ahead all you need. But living in normal place, well, I'm not saying Ecuador is not normal, it's totally normal. But living a bit outside of Ecuador bring you with a lot of seasonality, and it's extremely tough to plan ahead your need. And I think that as part of the, if you guys have had a blackout or lack of electricity only for a couple of hours, we kind of realize pretty fast, and it's an emergency service. It's something that we need to live. So I don't expect people to disconnect from the grid. As far as blockchain, that's a very good question. That seems to be a very attractive technology to do that. I guess it's a commercial question now. It's a policy question. It's very, very tough to plan ahead.
Yeah. Okay, so referring to the first question, so in Europe, I think, except maybe a few individual people, majority or up 99.9% are not interested to go off-grid. And referring to your second question, so it depends however you call it. We already have, let's say, these local markets. we have to clear these markets, or this is also the algorithms you have to clear them, and billing, accounting, and this kind of stuff. So this is already, in my opinion, in these different pilot projects, we have a matter of fact. So whether you call it a blockchain or simply clearing algorithm of a local on a local platform, this will happen, and happens already partly, in my opinion.
I'll continue with sort of one question from each side. So go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. It's been calculated that when 20% of the U.S. fleet of light cars and trucks are battery electric, there will be more charging power in those batteries than there is on the entire U.S. grid. So this raises the question of vehicle-to-grid, grid-to-vehicle exchanges, and using batteries from vehicles to provide backup power, to provide power quality and other sources. The vehicle manufacturers are the obstacle. They say, we will not give a warranty for a vehicle that is a battery vehicle if you use the battery for anything else than moving the vehicle. Is this barrier being overcome anywhere? Are battery technologies improving so that the number of cycles isn't the obstacle to let vehicle manufacturers allow vehicle-to-grid kind of power exchange? Clearly, if that were possible, it would be a major factor in making it possible to have reliable power based on home sources.
I guess these go to you, Marc.
Yes. Yeah, the question is about car manufacturer, if they're going to allow to make the battery for V2G. One thing I can say, we are in discussion with most manufacturers around the world because of our technology, obviously. Only Tesla prevent that now. Nissan, right now, their Leaf cars, that's with the higher battery, so the newer models, is fully approved for V2G and vehicle to home, so vehicle to grid, vehicle to home. And all Nissan cars in Japan are. Renault with the Zoe, the Fluence, it's also approved, and the next generation. Fiat Chrysler with the 500. So all manufacturers is. What was lacking for the Chevy Bolt, for people around you that have a Bolt, for example, that's a very popular car also, is that the technology, it was not ready. So V2G is a very expensive technology today. And this is what the problem was, not the battery itself, it was the way we can basically take the DC back to AC without being too technical. This changed rapidly due to some new technology coming. And Tesla already predict that probably in 2 or 3 years, their car going to be ready. The Model 3 is going to be ready, but they don't want to make it available right now as is. So it's going to change very, very rapidly. Nissan really leading the world right now in that direction. They already have 20,000 cars in Japan doing that right now. In UK, there's 5,000 cars in a test performance to do frequency balancing in the UK right now, and it worked flawlessly for the last 9 months, up to the point that the flex markets start to go down because of so much availability now of flexibility on the frequency market. So now even people have to start to take into account is, okay, should I invest that much in that frequency market, knowing that as soon as all the cars, like you said, I totally share your point of view, when all those cars, this technology going to be available, there's no more market for that, the price is going to collapse probably. Thank you.
Thank you all for your presentations. It seems that there's a consensus in this panel anyway and in other energy conferences that the prosumer, we are moving towards a prosumer market. This will have, and I think it's one of you talked about it, this will have an impact on how we are charged and billed for electricity. I'll probably be one of the enthusiast prosumer, as I have the intellectual, financial, and social capability of becoming one and benefiting from it and limiting the impact of on the electricity bill on my family. But I'm wondering, what will, if you would have any thoughts on the impact for low-income family and even middle-class family of that shifting towards prosumer markets? And if you are aware, we have any idea on any business model that can be integrated to that prosumer market to limit the impact on the access of energy for in our countries?
So maybe just one example with our kind of energy community model. So it's not implemented yet, but we also argue with this kind of community models also consumers only can participate without having a PV or a storage system there. And we try to model also signals from the distribution grid. If there is excess PV generation and if you face technical problems, so over voltage and this kind of stuff, that this might also reduce during those periods the distribution grid tariff, for instance. So we model also dynamic distribution grid tariffs. This means that electricity is cheaper during excess PV generation, and then this also is a benefit for those being consumers only, and this could be the low-income group or segment. That electricity definitely is lower. It depends on the trade-off. What's the physical problem for distributed grid operation versus reduced distribution grid tariff? That this, at least indirectly, could be a participation.
I think we will clearly see price of energy going down, as I mentioned in my presentation, but if we want to keep having security, unfortunately, we'll have to amortize the asset we already have built over the last 100 years. So these transportation network and these distribution network will still need to be maintained and built to somebody. So globally, I expect a price reduction, but I'm not sure we're heading for a huge amount of money here in terms of reduction.
As much as I want to say that these technologies are going to be heavily accessible for lower income, I think at first, no. I think the fact that it's going to be distributed and the new level of technology is going to happen, and I really share the point of view of my colleague here, I think what's going to happen is that it's going to lower the price of electricity at first and making this technology more cost-effective over the term. But one point I want to add, and again, I don't want to create, again, another argue with my friend Hugues here. I think it's a convenient excuse to say that the grid is there only for security of infrastructures. For Africa, to continue with your question about affordability, there's no way we're going to build those infrastructure in Africa. And I'm concerned as much as providing energy to Africa, that's providing energy here in North America or in the European. And the price of electricity is getting down, and the cost of these technologies is way more affordable for low income in Africa than trying to build large dams. We work with an oil and gas company, and for their own store, they are all installing right now off-grid renewables because they don't have the electricity for their gas pump, funny enough. So they consider in Africa that the grid is basically less secure and have more problems than distributed energy. So it's funny to see a large oil and gas company having this kind of mindset, and with this technology now being implemented in Africa, with 1 billion people there that cannot afford electricity for the first time, now they start to have it. So I think it's helping on different fronts, but we are lucky, and mostly if you're living in Quebec, Hydro-Quebec do a so wonderful job to make it so low. I don't think it's going to save the day here, but it can save the day in many parts of the world.
I don't necessarily disagree, by the way. I think that at the end of the day, a lot of places we're living the actual situation where decisions have already been made and the network are already there, the infrastructure is there, and we need to amortize it. If we would have to start from the scratch right now, like some area of the world have the chance, it's the same thing as the phone. I think there's some area of the world where they never saw the wired phone and they've jumped directly to the wireless one. And of course, they have reduced the cost of all this infrastructure have not been bear on anybody's bill. But we need to support our infrastructure, unfortunately.
Yeah, this question might fall in the category of what communist practices of the utilities are still justifiable, but energy efficiency programs run by utilities have been around for quite a few years, and they're classically justified by differences in discount rates between the private discount rates to the customers versus the utility or the social discount rates. And given the fact that energy efficiency and using less is probably on the lowest cost part of the GHG abatement curve, do you see any remaining value in utilities still being involved in those sorts of activities?
Yeah.
So forth to accelerate adoption of new end-use technologies.
Yeah, so I totally agree what you say. But the problem is, as a utility, so this actually means if somebody goes to the butcher and the butcher says, don't buy meat, go to North Sea and buy fish. Because most attractive for a utility is to sell kilowatt hours. And trying to motivate customers not to consume kilowatt hours, so then you might up in a profitability problem. So I know this is the energy service company discussion and all this kind of stuff, but utilities ultimately prefer to sell kilowatt hours, and this prevents energy efficiency, and this is our problem we have.
As I mentioned earlier, my only 4 customers are utilities, so you put me in a very delicate situation here. But I feel like they're doing something important, but their role will have to substantially change over the future. I think that if they keep going on doing what they've been doing over the last 100 years, it's not going to work anymore. So they will have to convert to more system operator alignment and leave some more room to the market to operate and leave some more place to different type of producer and allow customer to have a bigger impact on their own bill.
I think it's part of the equation. I don't think the world need less energy. I think the world need more energy, but that are clean, renewables, and cost-effective. So sometime in some place, trying to say that we should have, program to lower the, for energy saving, sometime like in Quebec here, doesn't make any sense. Yep. And asking the utilities to push for that make not even more sense, it's they are there, and I totally agree in this part. However, that being said, I think there's a part also utilities, to their defense here, coming from me, it's kind of weird, but utilities, to their defense, are working with rules that are completely obsolete in regard of their tariff. So people that don't know how you fix tariff, but basically the OPEX, or the cost of energy for most utilities, is a pass-through. They make rate of returns mostly on CapEx these days in almost everywhere around the world. And I think it's a problem. I think we should redo those rules to also enforce utilities to be efficient on all the different parts, and that should also include their OPEX. I know it's a bit of a technical discussion here, but I think that utilities try to do their best with their rules, and sometimes it's just a politician that say, hey, can you just make an energy efficient program so you're going to look good? And it's stuff like this. I think they should do better, but I think it's part of the solution, it's not the solution. So I totally agree with my colleague here.
Okay, maybe just not to present it that black and white than I have done in my last comment. So one example is in Vienna, in Austria, again, the municipality, so they implement these multi-apartment PV sharing concepts, no doubt about that, and they act as an energy service provider. And in addition, in their concept, they also do some retrofitting of the building, so contracting on the heat side and so on, and the entire package, of course, needs to be profitable for the company, and this is, let's say, a new kind of services, and at present they can gain the entire profits from this retrofitting activity, because at present everybody is eager to see these PV sharing concepts. And this is the novel aspect, that utilities really enter now this energy service provider, or take this role as an energy service providers, and try to raise profits again. And this in our areas could be some relaunch of these contracting models we tried 20 years ago, and where we actually did not succeed in Europe. As far as my experience is. But this is an example, so it's not that black and white I said previously, so it's gray.
Okay, thank you. Further questions? We still have got a few minutes. Yes, go on.
Thank you. You were talking about how subsidies, or actually the structure of utilities and so forth, can determine a little bit the types of energies that we're going to favor, or how we're going. And you were talking about how EV vehicles can become also a form of providing energy if we can tap into it, because it's a storage on wheels. But and we're talking about how it's important that it becomes competitive, the different energy sources, we remove all the subsidies. But EV cars are extremely subsidized. In Quebec, we are subsidizing them at $7,000 each. So to what extent are we pushing one technology versus other reorganization of mobility that might be a lot more efficient than just having one individual car, if we were more optimal with mobility as a system as opposed to just one technology?
I think you're reaching a very good point. It's obvious today that using high-scale utility storage or using EV as a storage right now needs subsidy in order to be effective. That's the truth right now. But once you look at cost reduction curve, it's obvious that it's no longer going to be the case pretty fast. The battery are changing so fast. You get improvement of price of 22% per year. You also get on top of that improvement on technology. So battery are being more efficient, battery are being easier to charge, battery are getting smaller. So it's pretty easy. It's like the solar industry. Nobody saw the solar industry becoming a real player while it was at the very beginning. My chart doesn't show it, but it really started at $700 a megawatt. Yeah. And personally, I was in the industry. I was doing hydro at the time. I was laughing at these guys. As you guys never going to be competitive. And frankly, today they're beating wind pretty easily, and they're going to be beating wind in 2-3 years even more. They are able to reduce price at an incredible pace. And I think that the revolution we're seeing right now, that started essentially once, I guess, Apple went, remember a couple of years ago, once Apple came with the first iPhone and showed that the battery was not changeable. That was the first appearance of a lithium-ion battery, and people says, you know what, it's not going to work. We want to change battery. We're not used to that. We were used to NiCad battery. But now, I think it's a reality. These batteries are decreasing in price at an incredible pace, and their technology are getting better and better each and every day, and I really think that the battery we're going to get in 5 or 6 years is going to be way better and way cheaper than the one we have right now, and it's not going to need any subsidy in order to do the job.
So when talking about financial support or subsidies, you always have to have in mind, so the market penetration curve, it's an S-curve. And at the beginning you have a prototype. So then the best option usually is to provide some investment subsidies or this kind of stuff, or investment grants. And this is what we started, let's say, 25 years ago or 20 years ago with wind, and then also with PV. And now it's time for electric vehicles. You need it because you need to trigger a critical mass being visible, and this, of course, is costly. But then, if you can trigger this, and people increasingly start adopting, then policymakers, they have to find, let's say, maybe an amended policy instrument. This then was the feed-in tariff for the renewables and the certificate schemes and so on. And now in the future, they have to sustain in the market based on PPAs and so on. And for electric vehicles, it's the same development. So at the beginning, you have to take some money to subsidize it, that the technology is visible, that people see it in the neighborhoods, and they get familiar. This could be an option in the future, and then gradually, of course, you have to phase out. But trying to implement a new technology in the market without any support, this is extremely difficult. So this is...
If you take, for example, the example we got with renewable energy, where we start being subsidized quite a lot, but right now, our problem is they're currently trying to subsidize coal in order to sustain in front of us, so that's crazy. Yes. Yeah. The world has completely reversed. If they just remove subvention to fossil fuel industry, I mean, it's going to be extremely fast. But we were subsidized at the beginning. We needed that to develop the technology.
Yeah. And I think it's very, very good answer. I'm just going to add two things about EVs, because we compare them to a traditional car, and when you look at the total cost of ownership of an EV, we're already on parity with a car. The problem is that the initial cost of the car is way higher, but the cost of basically using the car is way lower. What in most of, let's say, OECD market we don't have is upfront CapEx. People don't have the money. They look at the price of the car, they don't really look how much it costs to basically use the car over the years. And this is one of the problems of EVs today, is the upfront cost. And this is even, if I can continue on the question asked, with low incomes, it's even worse. We should give EVs to everybody that have a low income, because having the car after that, you know, no change of oil, no maintenance, and the cost of fuel is almost zero, make all the difference. So we need to compensate the upfront cost. So that's one of the first part. Can EV manufacturer do a better job of rentals? Most of EV manufacturers want to be in the energy business now. So they want to give you the car and sell you the energy. I've seen a lot of business plan around these. If this happens, then it's going to be the end of the traditional cars. And I think it's possible it's going to happen in 2023, 2024, but EV manufacturers are talking about this. The second point is a political choice. How much everybody in this room that don't have an EV, worse, have a Volkswagen diesels, are ready to give me money to compensate the fact that you pollute my environment for my kids? We decide to don't put that much tax on it. So we decide to give money and subsidize people that make the choice to have clean car. It's not perfect. EV is not perfect, okay? We still have some problems, environmentally speaking, building the cars, but it's way better, okay? There's no argue. So we decide to give money to people that try to do better instead of putting a tax on people that driving, F-150 with a double V8 engine and, running cold like I seen in Alabama. Super fun though. That's a matter of political choice.
Thank you. And thank you to the panel. Will you join me giving them a hand?